The story begins in the city of Isle, humanity's last fortress, which is up in flames. Suddenly, a large explosion occurs, destroying everything around it with a massive fire. Following that, an even bigger explosion happens in the already destroyed area. Amidst the rubble, a man struggles to his feet, exhausted and weary. Looking ahead, he sees a figure who tells him he is the last one remaining. Then, the demon shoots a powerful fire attack toward the warrior. This monster introduces himself as Colin Hall while smiling menacingly. The attack hits the young man head-on, completely engulfing him in flames. Even injured, he shows a look of determination, his eyes glowing. The villain praises him for continuing to fight despite being the only survivor. Because of this, he says he will let the human choose how he wants to pass on. The warrior, with a smile on his face, replies that it will be right there, right at that moment. With the enemy's reflection in his eye, the young man wonders if this is the end. Then, a memory shows that 1 year ago, the demons began their invasion. In the blink of an eye, they overran several cities, including the royal capital. The soldiers fought bravely, but they were no match for the magical monsters. This happened because, for humanity, magic was something quite different. Only a few people could use spells and powerful magic. This was a privilege reserved only for nobles with superior bloodlines. These pure-blooded nobles were the greatest hope against the enemy invasion. They believed they were the heroes who would save everyone from destruction. So they unleashed a shower of magic upon the invaders down below. However, a demon easily conjures a magic circle to defend himself. The nobles could not even imagine what was about to happen. Their magic was nothing more than child's play to the demons. At this, the mage becomes completely terrified upon seeing his power surpassed. Returning to the present, we see the result of the battle and the fallen soldiers. The warrior's thoughts reveal a book that could have changed the outcome. He regrets that, if he had the book sooner, things would not have turned out this way. The villain approaches and asks if he has thought about the best way to be defeated. The demon taunts the young man, offering to remove his limbs or set him ablaze. The human says the villain talks too much, and that he will have to use his last resort. Colin is confused by the warrior's statement and stares at him, not understanding. With that, the swordsman grabs his sword and says the enemy has said enough. Then he charges forward, yelling for the monster to be quiet once and for all. The blades clash, and the demon is surprised by his opponent's strength. The warrior yells with all his might, pushing his sword against the villain. With a well-aimed kick, he manages to push the enemy back, creating an opening. The monster seems a little annoyed by the human's unexpected resistance. The swordsman wastes no time and furiously prepares for his next attack. He manages to drive his sword into the demon's chest, who cries out in pain. Colin asks if the young man really thought he could defeat him with mere swordsmanship. Then he starts laughing, mocking humanity for being weak and powerless. Suddenly, the villain begins to feel a strange pain and cries out, not understanding. He says it's impossible for a human sword to have even scratched him. The warrior explains that with normal swordsmanship, it would indeed be impossible. He holds his weapon firmly as a blue aura begins to emanate from it. But with the forbidden sword, which sacrifices the soul and life, it's a different story. The young man charges again, his blade glowing with immense power. An intense battle begins, with the two exchanging blows at high speed. The human manages to defend against a powerful attack from the demon with his sword. In that moment, he spots an opening in the enemy's guard and yells that he's got him. With a swift move, he removes the monster's arm, who cries out in pain. Colin looks at his removed limb with an expression of anger and surprise. Even injured, he grabs the warrior's blade and mentions the forbidden sword. The villain smiles and says that if it had been a surprise attack, the result would have been different. The swordsman notices his sword is starting to crack, not understanding why. The demon says that, unfortunately for the young man, it was not a surprise attack. With a tight grip, he shatters the blade, saying the warrior barely failed. Then the monster's hand lunges toward the human's face, yelling for him to perish. The demon's attack sends him flying, causing a large explosion on the spot. Lying on the ground, the warrior is completely defeated and has no strength left to fight. He thinks that even with all that, it wasn't enough to defeat the enemy. With his face full of anger, He grits his teeth for not being able to achieve victory. Then the monster's hand grabs his neck, lifting him off the ground with ease. The villain holds him in the air as the young man laments that this was the best he could do. In his thoughts, he apologizes to his comrades for not succeeding. The demon smiles victoriously as the last human has finally admitted defeat. With that, the monster begins to use its strength to crush the warrior's body. The young man's blood starts to drip onto a book that was in his pocket. The drops of blood make the symbol on the book's cover glow brightly. Suddenly, the warrior opens his eyes, wondering what is happening. He wonders why he is still alive and where he could be at that moment. The first thing that comes to his mind is the name of his greatest enemy, Colin Hall. Then he stands up and in a battle stance yells, asking who is there. His eye reflects something that leaves him surprised and unable to understand the situation. The book he had before is floating in front of him, glowing brightly. The young man recognizes the floating object and calls it a magic grimoire. The book says that his blood has awakened it and that it will help him go back in time. The swordsman becomes thoughtful at the idea of being able to start all over again. He clenches his fist tightly and says he doesn't know who or what that book is, but he thinks that if he can really start all over, it will be a great chance. This is an opportunity he could have never even dreamed of. The grimoire says that this is splendid and that it will stay by his side from now on. It also promises to help the young man master magic to fulfill his wish. A blue light envelopes the warrior as the scenery around him dissolves. The magic book opens in front of him as the light grows even stronger. With Colin's name in mind, he asks the grimoire to show him a new future. The young man's gaze shows an unshakable determination to change his destiny. Finally, a hooded figure holds the magic book, promising a new future. The crowd shouts the butcher's name as a strong hand grips a hammer. In the arena, a giant, muscular man with a covered face stares at his opponent. The protagonist looks at the sky and wonders in confusion where he is at that moment. He realizes he is in a slave arena with a huge opponent in front of him. Looking at his hands, he sees he is holding a simple sword and shield. The butcher wastes no time and swings his hammer down with all his might. With a look of understanding, the young man finally gets what is happening there. The crowd in the stands cheers excitedly for the butcher without stopping for a second. Two nobles watch the fight, and one of them is Viscount Slaith of the Rhine territory. Slaith then gives a wicked smile as he talks about the role of the poor souls. He says that commoners are no different from slaves and serve to entertain them. The warrior listens to all of this with a serious expression of complete contempt. The noble adds that in the end, they are all nothing more than mere pawns. The giant's attack raises a cloud of dust, and the audience goes wild. The people continue to chant the gladiator's name, hoping for a massacre in the arena. Viscount Slaith smiles, satisfied with the bloody spectacle before him. From his privileged position, he watches the fight with an air of superiority. Another, older noble seems to recognize something in the arena and becomes thoughtful. The butcher is standing still, but his victim has disappeared, leaving him surprised. The giant looks around, confused, not understanding where his opponent went. The young man is on top of the hammer and realizes he has returned to the time when he was a slave. A magic circle appears in his hand, and he wonders if the book has merged with him. His eyes shine with power, and he realizes he now has a new opportunity. With a firm step, he gets off the giant hammer and faces his enemy head on. His sword is now enveloped in a blue aura, showing his new magical power. He declares that from this moment on, he will change his destiny once and for all. The warrior charges forward and, with a quick strike, makes a deep cut on the giant. He lands stylishly as the butcher falls defeated to the arena floor. The grimoire's symbol glows in his eye, and he thinks about changing humanity's future. The crowd that was once cheering for the butcher is now completely silent. He thinks he has no choice but to master the magic recorded in the grimoire. But with his status as a slave, this is nothing more than a distant dream for the young man. Therefore, he first needs to somehow get close to the nobles above. His goal is to infiltrate the family of Marquis Darius Hall, the lord of the territory. Looking at the Marquis, he knows he needs to do this as quickly as possible. The protagonist is determined to achieve this faster than in his previous life. He remembers an old man saying that all the commoners bet on his victory. They believed the young man would defeat the butcher, who was backed by the nobles. But the old man, afraid, said he couldn't defy Lord Slate's orders. Then, crying, he begged the warrior to lose, or else he would be taken out. Colin understands that Slate is trying to sacrifice him to please the other nobles. In that case, he decides he will use this situation to get into the Hall family. With a determined look, he outlines his new plan for the future that awaits him. The young man yells for them to stop stalling and bring on the next opponent. In the stands, Viscount Slate slams his fist, furious with his attitude. Another noble angrily asks if the butcher wasn't supposed to have won the fight. The man complains that he bet a considerable amount on the giant's victory. Slate desperately asks for calm and says this is all part of his plan. Meanwhile, Marquis Hall asks his servant what he thought of that strike. The servant praises the cut, saying it was as powerful and precise as a master's. The Marquis smiles and says the best part was seeing him defy Slate's orders. A memory shows the butcher attacking the young man during the combat in the arena. Slate explains that if you let the commoners dream a little, they will spend more. He reassures everyone to stay calm, as everything is going according to plan. The noble says that next time they will see Colin destroyed, but the young man wins again. The crowd now chants Colin's name as he steps on his defeated opponent. The Viscount is completely shocked and speechless at the unexpected victory. The other nobles accuse him of trying to deceive them, as this wasn't what they agreed on. Slate wonders in terror what that gladiator is planning to do. Then, furious, he shouts for his guards to gather all the gladiators right now. Viscount Slate is enraged, while the Marquis thinks things have become interesting. Following the noble's orders, several gladiators prepare for the fight in the arena. With that, an army of fighters advances toward our protagonist. Colin remembers that Marquis Darius dreamed of a world of magic for everyone, but now he can make that dream come true. But he needs to get the Marquis's attention. He thinks that just defeating opponents in a simple way won't be enough. So the warrior challenges all the other gladiators to fight him at the same time. The crowd goes wild at the young man's attitude and calls him crazy. The people shout for Colin as his enemies surround him, ready for combat. Even at a great disadvantage, he faces them all with a calm and confident gaze. With a swift movement, the young man easily dodges the first attack from a gladiator. The fighters are shocked that they missed and think it's impossible for him to be so fast. The protagonist looks back with his sword ready for a counterattack. In the blink of an eye, he defeats 3 opponents with a single, precise strike. His face shows a cold determination as he continues to fight in the arena. 2 more adversaries advance with spears, trying to hit him at the same time. With a well-placed kick, Colin disarms one of the gladiators, breaking his weapon. He moves between the spears, and the enemies almost hit each other in the confusion. The young man moves with mastery, leaving opponents fallen on the arena floor. Then one of the largest gladiators jumps to attack him with a huge sword. The protagonist remains calm and faces the attack head on without showing any fear. He holds his own sword firmly, preparing for the impact of the blow. Using magic, he stops the blade and lands a fatal punch on the giant's chest. The crowd and Viscount Slate are left speechless by this display of power. The enemy's sword flies and almost hits Slate, breaking the wall beside him. The noble is startled to see the cracked wall, right where he was sitting before. With his face sweating, the Viscount is paralyzed, unable to believe what he saw. In the arena, Colin's foot steps on the broken sword of a defeated opponent. The warrior stands victorious after defeating all his enemies. With a confident smile, he faces the now silent crowd. Viscount Slate yells furiously that he will make the young man pay for the humiliation he suffered. Suddenly, Marquis Darius lets out a laugh, and the other nobles look at him, confused. Darius tells Slate that his plans were ruined because the pawn has become the player. A noble accuses the Marquis of not caring about the slave's affront to them. The Marquis questions the idea of maximum punishment and the title of slave with contempt. He asks if looking down on others is the common sense of the nobles in that region. The nobles fall silent, sweating nervously at the Marquis's direct question. Slaith bangs his scepter on the ground and asks if Darius is still chasing false ideals. He conjures wind magic in his hand, while questioning the Marquis's beliefs. Slaith says that 1,000 years ago, a hierarchy was born when God gave them magic, and they, as nobles, became representatives of God and must follow his precepts. He accuses the Marquis of defying God's will with his wrong ideologies. The protagonist just watches the argument between the two nobles with a smile. With a leap, Colin lands between the nobles and asks what the problem is with that. Everyone is shocked by the slave's audacity to interrupt their conversation. Colin faces Slaith and says that if he is a representative of God, then he should face him. He challenges the noble to fight in the name of God to prove his superiority. The crowd is shocked by the slave's challenge and fears for his life. The other nobles smile at the situation, thinking the young man has completely lost his mind. Marquis Darius is surprised but curious about how the events will unfold. Slaith calls the warrior a despicable slave and glares at him with hatred in his eyes. He says the young man ruined his plans, mocked God, and now challenges him. An aura of mana surrounds the noble as a magic circle appears under Colin. The grimoire in his mind warns him about the detected mana, and he wonders what it is. A screen appears showing Slaith's stats, with his level and the spells he uses. Slaith furiously says that if the young man wants to pass on so badly, he will help him. The protagonist remains calm and confident in the face of the powerful noble's threat. The Viscount casts his wind magic, promising to send the slave to the afterlife. Marquis Darius recognizes the magic as wind blade and becomes worried. The other nobles laugh and start betting on how many pieces the young man will be cut into. Another noble laughs and says he'll go with the bet of 8 pieces of the young man's body. Slaith yells for Darius to watch and see the difference in power between them and a slave. The wind magic tears Colin's clothes as he faces it with a confident smile. He sees his own stats and realizes that despite everything, it's still beginner-level magic. With his beginner-level magic resistance, the spell will have no effect on him. The protagonist thinks that this ability that came with the grimoire will be very useful. He stands still in the middle of the wind attack, without getting a single scratch. To him, Slaith's powerful magic is nothing more than a light, refreshing breeze. The Viscount's jaw drops when he sees his strongest attack being useless. Marquis Darius is also surprised by the warrior's incredible resistance. The other nobles shout in shock, not understanding how he survived the magic. Colin walks through the wind and prepares to attack the noble, who is in shock. Slaith draws his sword in desperation, shouting that it's impossible for him to have resisted. With a swift movement, the warrior closes in for the final blow against the noble. In the blink of an eye, Colin passes by Slaith, who is paralyzed with fear. The Viscount breaks into a cold sweat as he feels the sword's blade on his neck. He is frozen, seeing the tip of the weapon so close to ending his life. With his sword stuck in the ground, Colin defeats the noble without even harming him. The grimoire warns that it has detected another source of mana approaching quickly. Suddenly, a magic circle traps the young man on the ground, and he wonders what it is. Skeletal hands emerge from the ground and grab him, preventing him from moving. He is surrounded by the shadowy hands, not understanding what kind of magic this is. The hands completely immobilize him, even covering his mouth to silence him. Then a voice says they have arrived in response to the emergency call. A squad of knights led by a woman approaches the warrior. They surround him, and their leader accuses him, in the name of Ursula, of defying a noble. With a serious look, the young man tries to break free, but the hands are too strong. The leader of the knights introduces himself as a divine guard and places him under arrest. The Tower is a magical organization whose purpose is to uphold God's authority, and the divine guards are an elite group of nobles with power superior to common nobles. He thinks it would be easy to break the spell, but doesn't want to draw attention yet. He concentrates to try to break free, but the hands grip him even tighter. With a determined look, he realizes that now it's all or nothing in his gamble. Then, with his mouth free, he starts shouting his plan for everyone to hear. He declares himself as Colin Hall, son of Marquis Darius, and demands to be released. The divine guards are confused and wonder if he is really the Marquis's son. Viscount Slaith is also shocked and questions the name the young man shouted. The crowd begins to whisper, wondering if that slave is really a noble. Colin knows that divine guards would never lay a hand on a noble. Now he waits to see how the situation will unfold in his favor. Slaith furiously says that he is lying to save his own life from punishment. He charges forward to attack Colin, saying he deserves to be punished 1,000 times for this. Marquis Darius shouts for him to wait and stops the attack against the young man. The noble approaches with a serious expression to resolve the situation right there. Slaith tries to apologize, saying he was just finishing off the insolent one. Darius calls him a fool and scolds him for dragging his family's name through the mud. The guards are shocked to see the Marquis, seemingly confirming the story. The Viscount is completely confused and doesn't understand what is happening. Darius grabs the young man and says he thought handing him over to the guild would set him straight. He grips Colin's neck tightly, showing his anger at the situation. The Marquis accuses him of not mending his ways, and even laying a hand on a Viscount. With a smirk, the protagonist thinks that his risky gamble paid off. He declares in his mind that this move was his great victory for the day. Darius faces Viscount Slaith with a serious and authoritative expression. The Viscount apologizes for the trouble his idiot caused everyone there. Colin shouts that Slaith was the one who insulted him first, but the Marquis ignores him. Darius yells for him to be silent and glares at him with a furious look. The Marquis turns to the guards and says he will have a talk with the young man himself. Then he dismisses the guards, telling them they can return to their posts now. Slaith tries to stop them, shouting not to release that man under any circumstances. Slaith yells at Darius and says he will not allow anyone to take that slave. Colin gets a little nervous with the Viscount's insistence on finishing him off. With eyes full of hatred, Slaith vows to take him out right there, no matter the cost. He moves to attack the Marquis and the young man, but his sword is stopped in mid-air. With a smirk, the protagonist starts to laugh at Slaith's pathetic situation. He reminds him that he said no one could take the slave, but what if it's not just anyone? The young man asks if that promise includes the Lord of the Rhine territory himself, or if it also includes the divine guards who came to arrest the supposed slave. With a provocative smile, Colin accuses Slaith of planning a rebellion right there. The Viscount turns pale with fear upon realizing the verbal trap he has fallen into. He stammers, trying to deny the accusation, and nervously drops his sword on the ground. The leader of the guards snaps his fingers, and the magic holding Colin dissipates. He approaches and says it was all just a misunderstanding and apologizes. The guard says goodbye and leaves with his men, putting the matter behind them. Then he turns to Viscount Slaith with a serious look and calls him by name. The guard informs him that he will report the incident to the Magic Tower immediately. He also says that Slaith will be contacted for appropriate treatment later. With his body aching all over, the protagonist breathes a sigh of relief that his plan worked. Far from there, the guards comment on the man named Colin and the strange situation. One of them questions if he is really the Marquis's son, since they've never heard of him. They wonder how the Lord of the territory could have a son in secret. The leader of the guard states with certainty that the man is not the Marquis's son. His subordinates wonder why Darius protected him if he is not his relative. The leader says he can't thank him for the help, but orders them to monitor the young man. His soldiers agree to the order and prepare to follow the instructions. In a luxurious carriage traveling through the forest, the sound of laughter echoes. The carriage sways along the road as the lively conversation continues inside. Marquis Darius praises the young man's performance, saying it was a beautiful spectacle. Inside the carriage, he and his servant talk with Colin, who is silent. Finally, the Marquis looks at the young man and thanks him for the help he provided earlier. The warrior thinks that Darius sent his butler to pay for his freedom and now considers his next step. Suddenly, the noble asks Colin if he has ever been on a battlefield, leaving the young man confused. The Marquis comments that his movements seemed like those of an experienced warrior or someone trained by a master. The protagonist remains silent for a moment, not knowing exactly how to answer that question. He begins to invent a story about being born in a village and being sold after his parents passed away. Then a noble bought him and taught him the basics of magic, and also how to truly fight. With a serious look, he adds that this man was like a real father to him. The young man says this person entrusted him with a great ideal, but in the end, he couldn't achieve it. With his eyes shining, he states that this time he wants to live up to that man's expectations. Darius is impressed by the young man's determination and the story he just told. The noble thinks that Slaif's attacks didn't work because of his basic knowledge of magic, and also because of his strong heart that never lets hope fade, no matter how difficult things get. The Marquis then thinks that this young man is quite promising and could be very useful for his plans. He believes that with the warrior's help, he might finally be able to achieve his great ideals. Suddenly, his servant calls his attention, pulling him from his deep thoughts at that moment. The carriage wheel stops, turning abruptly, indicating they have reached their final destination. The servant announces that they have arrived, and the carriage stops in front of a huge and luxurious mansion. The Hall family mansion is gigantic and imposing, showing all their power and wealth. Darius gets out of the carriage and tells the young man to follow him, as he is no longer a slave from now on. The protagonist looks outside with a serious and determined expression on his face. The Marquis warns that this doesn't mean he will have a life of peace and tranquility from now on. The young man understands that the law of that world is survival of the fittest, and he needs to prove his worth. Darius says his help ends there, and that the rest depends solely on the young warrior's effort. Whether or not he will be able to overcome the next challenge that awaits him will depend only on himself. The protagonist faces the challenge head-on with a confident gaze and not a hint of fear. The Marquis gives a smile and says he is counting on him for what's to come in the mansion. Upon hearing his new name, the young man thinks that the first phase of his plan has been successfully completed. It is explained that nobles marry among themselves to preserve the authority of their magic and bloodline. The Hall family, in particular, is completely obsessed with this supremacy of the bloodline. This makes the mansion a dangerous place, full of intrigue for anyone who is not of pure blood. But Darius Hall is an exception, as he was born to a servant mother and suffered much prejudice. Even so, with effort and overwhelming strength, he managed to rise to the rank of duke. With that, he became the Lord of the Rhine territory, a name known to all. Walking through the mansion, the noble says he doesn't care about our protagonist's origins. He reinforces that the young man's past doesn't matter to him at all at that moment. With a confident smile, the Marquis states that in this place, strength is absolutely everything. The warrior then imagines all he can achieve: wealth, status, and great honor. The noble extends his hand and promises that he will give the young man anything he desires. But of course, he imposes the condition that the young man has the skills to deserve it all. With a serious look, the Marquis tells Colin to remember those words he said well. The protagonist then asks quietly if the noble really meant anything. With his eyes shining, he prepares to make a bold and unexpected request to everyone. The young man asks what would happen if he wanted the Marquis his seat as lord. The noble is silent for a moment, completely shocked by the audacity of the request. Suddenly, Darius starts to laugh out loud, finding the whole situation very amusing. He challenges him, saying that if the young man has so much confidence, he can try to take his position. The warrior thinks that Marquis Darius is a meritocrat who values only merit. This idea of equal opportunity for all has made him hated by those who defend purity. Then, a woman in a red dress approaches and welcomes the noble who has arrived. Darius looks at her with a serious and unhappy expression to see her there at that moment. It is revealed that his enemies are in his own family, like his son and his wife, Katrina. The Marquis says he didn't announce his return, but it seems he can't hide anything from her. The woman says that rumors spread, and that a little bird told her about the fight with Slaith. The noble scoffs at the little bird excuse, knowing very well what really happened. With a victorious smile, the redhead woman shows that she is always one step ahead of him. The Marquis thinks he could have sworn that's not how she found out about everything. He knows that in reality, she simply had spies following him everywhere. The protagonist recognizes the woman as Katrina, the person who ruined his life in the past. She became the second wife, but because she inherited everything from her parents, she is treated as the first. He remembers falling into her trap in his past life, but swears it won't happen again. With a confident smile, the young man introduces himself, saying he is honored by the reception. He introduces himself as Colin Hall and swears total loyalty to the Marquis's family. Katrina's son is shocked and furious to hear the warrior's surname. He shouts in anger, asking who that axe slave thinks he is to use their name. Katrina, furious, calls the young man a slave for using a noble's name and calls for Cornell. A man in a suit approaches and responds to the noble woman's call with a bow. With a look of contempt, she asks if he hasn't been educating the newcomers. The butler named Cornell just bows his head in silence at the reprimand. The protagonist draws his sword and says he received the surname from the head of the house himself. With his blade pointed at the two of them, he asks if they have anything against the Marquis's decision. He declares that one day he will be the lord of the territory and will make everyone bow before him. The woman is speechless at the audacity and confidence of the young warrior before her. At this, her son grits his teeth in anger at the newcomer's declaration. Meanwhile, Marquis Darius just watches the scene with a satisfied smile on his face. The mansion's servants begin to whisper, shocked at the idea of Colin becoming the lord. The maids also gossip and call his declaration complete nonsense. Katrina then clears her throat to get the attention of all the servants present. Immediately, all the servants fall silent and line up, waiting for her orders. Our protagonist remains calm and faces the situation without any apparent fear. With a contemptuous smile, she looks at the young man, ready to give her order. She says that a despicable slave shouldn't open his mouth that way in front of them. Then the maids grab their weapons, preparing for the upcoming attack. The butlers also get ready and firmly grip their combat weapons immediately. All the house servants appear to be well-trained warriors, ready to fight. Following the woman's order, all the servants charge at Colin at once. But suddenly, Marquis Darius shouts for everyone to stop the attack immediately. He stands in front of the young man to protect him from the servants, who stopped in mid-air. The noble says that everything Colin said is true, and that he can inherit his position. Katrina's son shouts his father's name, completely shocked by the declaration. He asks what the noble is saying, as he can't believe his words. The Marquis faces his son with a serious and firm gaze, maintaining his final decision. With a smile, Katrina says that if this is the noble's choice, she won't argue anymore. However, with a smirk, she says she has a small condition for accepting. The woman explains that in the mansion, hundreds of servants work hard every day, and yet only a few have had the honor of receiving a family surname. These servants dedicate their lives to the house, but do not receive such a great privilege for it. So, a newcomer who appeared out of nowhere being able to call himself Hall is a problem for everyone. She asks Darius if he expects everyone else to be happy with this. Therefore, the woman suggests they put the young man to a test to prove his worth. He needs to prove his strength so that everyone accepts the noble's decision here. The protagonist then says with a smile that this won't be enough for him to accept. The noble's son shouts and asks if the warrior is afraid to take the test. The young man says it makes no sense for him to take the test alone, and that everyone should participate. He says the successor must be competent, not a failure who was born into the family. Angrily, the young noble shouts that this was the greatest humiliation of his entire life. He can't believe he will have to compete with servants and slaves for the house's succession. Katrina places a hand on his shoulder and makes him calm down with a cold, serious look. She looks at him and says she has told him many times how a noble should behave. A noble should be elegant and not get worked up over a simple monkey. The woman reminds him that he possesses the absolute power of magic in his noble veins. Then she tells him to just sit back and watch from above what will happen now. The young noble agrees with his mother, although very reluctantly about the whole situation. In the end, the Marquis accepted the plan and decided to hold a selection test in 1 month. Until then, the protagonist will have to work as a low-level servant in the mansion, but he thinks this is the perfect opportunity to study his magic grimoire. The butler turns and asks if the young man knows exactly how to please Lord Darius. Cornell explains that the man has noble ideals, and for that reason, he is watched by many. The servant then recalls that the young man said he was taken by a noble before arriving there, but the slave association said he was bought directly from a remote village. And this happened just when Lord Darius was desperate for a successor. The young man is surprised to hear that his sudden appearance is very suspicious. At that, the older man points a blade at him and doubts that this is just a coincidence. Holding the weapon firmly, the young man states that there is some logic to the whole accusation, but he quickly explains that the members of the slave association would set up a plan without a second thought. With that, the boy remembers they wanted to steal money from the bets and would never leave him alone. At this moment, the butler comments that the young man's skills were clearly at a very advanced level. Seeing as in swordsmanship and magic, there are very well-defined levels set by the empire. Since nobles focus on magic, most get stuck at the intermediate level with the sword. However, in special organizations like the Divine Guard, an advanced level of proficiency is required. Looking down, the veteran realizes that perhaps the merchants passed on false information. Then, he notices he was manipulated to eliminate the boy, and the young man decides to clear up the whole situation. Smiling confidently, the newcomer points out that if he were a spy, he would never aim for the Lord's position. Hearing that, the man in the suit becomes completely confused by this sudden statement. Thus, the young man explains that a spy's main goal is to infiltrate and discover weaknesses. Making a gesture with his hand, he concludes his reasoning very directly. Pointing his finger, the swordsman confesses that he would actually aim for the butler's own position. Sweating, the older man understands that stealing the head butler's position would make everything much easier. Offering a handshake, the servant proposes a deal to hunt down the spies from other nobles there. Glancing sideways, the veteran warns that this would make the boy an enemy of powerful people. Not caring about the danger, he smiles and says that great risks always bring great rewards. The veteran wonders if the boy is ready to bear the weight of the crown and notes that he is quite clever. But the man finds this deal too advantageous and wonders if the young man has some other plan in mind. Without showing much emotion, the head butler announces that he will first show the newest ally his quarters. At this, the young man just smiles confidently, agreeing with his superior's idea. They then walk around the grounds of the gigantic mansion that belongs to the family of that territory. The butler soon explains that the house servants are divided into 3 classes created by the madam. The high-class servants are those who directly tend to the needs of the madam and the masters. The middle-class employees receive special permission to live inside the mansion itself. And finally, there are the manual laborers, whom the older man makes a point of mentioning. These are the low-class servants who live in separate lodgings and are forbidden to come near. Stopping in front of the simple shacks, the head butler informs the boy that he can choose whichever place he wants. He explains that the work will be chopping wood and caring for the horses, earning 3 copper coins a day. Turning his back, the veteran decides to lay out the rules of the place, demanding respect for the older servants. The young man listens attentively as his superior decrees that the main rule is absolute obedience. Walking away, the man in the suit announces that these were the rules decided by the lady of the house. With a smirk, the butler leaves, seeming pleased with the newcomer's humiliating situation. The swordsman lowers his head thoughtfully and understands very well how this scheme of total obedience works. Without wasting time, he goes to the stables and finds a group of men who don't look very friendly. The trio of workers immediately starts laughing mockingly upon seeing the scrawny guy arriving. Maintaining a firm posture, the boy faces the big guys and introduces himself simply as the new guy in the area. Smiling kindly, the young man says he is excited to work with them. But the bullies just burst out laughing, finding the boy utterly pathetic. At this, the young man's face turns serious as the group taunts him, calling him the future lord. Approaching, the big guy comments that he heard about the fight against the lady of the house. With that, the redhead warns that they are going to teach him how to greet the veterans there. To intimidate the newcomer, one of them breaks a glass bottle at that moment. Holding the shards, the man demands that the swordsman get on his knees right away. Poking the newcomer's chest, The leader asks if he heard the message. Laughing sadistically, the brute grabs the smaller employee's clothes. Without wasting time, the boy lands a powerful knee to the aggressor's face. Seeing the scene, the other two are completely shocked by the quick reaction. Taking another kick, the giant is thrown far away with extreme force. Smashing through the wooden crates, the man falls to the ground, badly injured. Smiling mockingly, the recruit warns that he won't go easy on them. Acting quickly, he lands a devastating blow to another employee's face. While throwing punches, the warrior repeats that he is happy to be working there. Quite furious, the two workers decide to go after the newcomer. Holding a wooden stool, the redhead tries to hit the boy without mercy. Keeping his cool, the swordsman just smiles, showing complete superiority. Without backing down a single step, he draws his sword in a very swift motion. Using the weapon, he delivers a powerful attack, sweeping the enemies away. The blow hits the aggressor's chin, knocking him to the ground instantly. Leaping high, the warrior comes down, stomping hard on his opponent's body. The sole of his boot hits the guy's face, ending the confrontation right there. Being thrown through the air, the worker falls defeated on the other side of the barn. Frightened, the last bully backs away, holding his face and trembling with fear. Pointing the blade up close, the young man intimidates the guy left standing. Staring menacingly, he asks if the veterans are satisfied. Crying in terror, the man shouts, affirming that he understood the rules perfectly. Satisfied with the answer, the boy sheathes his weapon, turning his back to leave. The injured bully glares at the boy with great anger and curses at him. At that, the desperate man grips the broken bottle tightly. Charging forward with everything he has, the aggressor tells the young man to get lost. But the young man just lets out a sigh, maintaining his total composure. With a quick move, the swordsman neutralizes his rival's attack. Then the big guy's weapon flies away, along with his courage. The man cries out in pain upon realizing he has been completely defeated. Looking down, the newcomer confirms that this is the end of the trouble. With that, the warrior reflects that he has gained the butler's trust. However, he knows that dangerous things could happen in the future. At this point, the story tells that the countess married the lord, and she soon replaced all the servants, creating a very bad atmosphere. Thus, the current head butler was chosen to watch the woman's every move. As it happens, the veteran also has power in the choice of the hair. But in his past life, this man's demise was the beginning of the chaos. At that point, the villainess gained power and put her own son in control. Sitting on the floor, the boy remembers that he needs to learn about magic, so he concentrates his energy, wanting to create a good defense. With a focused mind, the young man summons a powerful magic book. Opening his eyes, the young man commands the grimoire to be released. He soon recalls the teachings of an old friend from the past. Smiling, the newcomer finds the ease of using spells incredible. Feeling the power flow, the warrior becomes completely thrilled. Touching a glowing page, he prepares to train. But suddenly, a gigantic light hits the boy's body. Gritting his teeth, the young man feels knowledge invading his mind. He feels an absurd pain, as if he were burning from the inside. Sweating, the young man understands that this is the price of the skill. At that moment, a shadowy figure in armor appears before him. Overcoming the pain, the protagonist declares that he will master this power. Being thrown, the aggressor breaks through the wooden wall and falls outside, screaming in pain. The next day, we see a worker calmly washing clothes in a wooden bucket. But soon, the two injured veterans look up, startled, when someone suddenly calls them. At that moment, a boot steps firmly on the ground as the servants notice the newcomer's arrival. Walking casually, the swordsman yawns, thinking he would be attacked during the night. Smiling confidently, the young man says that trying anything against him would have been pointless. Looking up, the warrior observes a blue system screen with his skills. With a wide smile on his face, the young man confirms that his grand plan was an absolute success. Stretching, the recruit says he is tired from the night's training and decides to get something to eat. Meanwhile, in the city, a group of guards walks through the streets, clearing a path among the people. Standing nearby, two commoners bow quickly upon noticing the presence of the royal soldiers. Led by a man with an eye patch, the troop demands total submission from the residents. At that moment, a tired boy walks by, carrying a very heavy wooden bucket. Without noticing, the boy ends up stopping right in front of the tune, passing through that street. Furious, one of the officers kicks the poor guy hard, sending water flying everywhere. The spilled liquid ends up completely soaking the boot of one of the group's members. Lifting his leg, the bald leader glares at his dirty shoe with a very dark expression. Trying to hit the villager, the irritated soldier is stopped by the captain, who urges for calm. Crying in despair, the resident throws himself on the ground, begging for forgiveness for not watching his way. Crouching beside him, the big man smiles kindly, saying that accidents happen. Breathing a sigh of relief, the young man thanks him as the veteran begins to laugh sinisterly. But changing his tone quickly, the man warns that things wouldn't end so easily. Grabbing the civilian's face, the chief says that useless eyes needed to be severely punished, and without any mercy, the soldier injures the worker as screams echo throughout the square. Watching from a distance, the other residents feel great pity but dare not do anything. Noticing the stares, the leader's henchman glares at everyone angrily and tells them to lower their heads. Oppressing the crowd, he forces everyone to kneel as the protagonist walks nearby. Distracted by hunger, the newcomer is thinking about food until he is noticed by the stressed guard. At that moment, one of the brutes who got beaten in the barn sees the scene and calls for his boss. Pointing at the boy, the injured man warns that this is the dangerous madman who attacked him before. Staring at the young man, the group's leader becomes visibly furious at the affront. The man shouts at the newcomer, ordering him to kneel like everyone else there. Smiling disdainfully, the warrior asks if the chief wants to have his hands removed too. The veteran licks his dirty hand and laughs, calling the boy an arrogant brat. At that, 2 guards surround him, and the chief says the newcomer will pay in kind. Unfazed, he unsheathes his sword and warns that he will also give them a choice. Looking coldly, the young man asks if they would rather keep their arm or their head, but the leader states that he won't lower himself to fighting with a mere servant. With that, he points to another man and says that man will handle everything. The swordsman then widens his eyes, completely shocked by the surprise appearance. A muscular man named Dak appears, who was a former champion of the slave arena. Sweating, the warrior can't believe he would run into his old friend in that place. He remembers when he fought alongside his comrade in several dangerous battles. The two also spent their time playing games and having fun together in their spare time, and they even celebrated together their victory against a giant monster on a difficult mission. Back in the present, he notices that his friend was being beaten by the guards until now. Looking at his comrade, the warrior asks if he is really going to fight in their place. The ex-champion explains that the rule there is to obey superiors and punish rebels. The newcomer questions if his friend doesn't mind being used, and he remains silent. Seeing his comrade's reaction, the swordsman gives a very discreet smirk. At this, Dak's face fills with tension upon hearing his old partner's words. The other aggressor who got beaten in the barn also prepares for the fight that is about to start. The chief smiles confidently, remembering that rules were made to be followed. But the young man says he will break all those rules and appears in front of the leader. The other guards are shocked by his speed and wonder how he moved. Even the ex-champion is impressed by his old friend's agility. In the blink of an eye, he realizes the warrior has suddenly managed to steal his sword. Frightened, the chief shouts, not knowing who the newcomer threatening him with the blade is. The man says he was chosen by Lord Fred, and to defy him is to go against a great noble. The other soldiers just watch the tense scene, unsure of what to do at that moment. The local residents watch the confusion from a distance with worried and tense looks. But the warrior faces the platoon chief with a cold and confident gaze. With a swift movement, the young man uses the stolen sword to attack the leader without hesitation. The veteran says he understands the situation, but can't let the young man leave unscathed. With that, he turns to his henchman and announces he will rough up the boy first. The 2 soldiers smile cruelly, ready to attack at any moment, but suddenly, they turn and injure the ex-champion with their sharp swords. The protagonist is shocked to see his friend being attacked by his own allies. The chief explains that he needs to teach a lesson to his disobedient subordinates. Kneeling on the ground, the young man's friend is covered in wounds all over his body. Without mercy, one of the guards drives his sword into the swordsman's friend's hand. He shouts that the ex-champion wasted a great opportunity to redeem himself. The other henchman threatens him, saying that if he fails again, it will be his end. At that moment, the hero dashes forward at high speed, enveloped in a blue aura. The injured friend's eye glows with a golden light as he watches the scene with his blade. The warrior passes through the aggressors in a single, precise strike. Noticing an opening, the leader of the guards smiles maliciously and confidently. He then raises his sword, ready to attack the protagonist from behind. But the young man turns and blocks the attack, creating a powerful impact of light. The chief is speechless upon realizing his weapon was broken instantly. He stares at the rest of the blade in his hand, unable to believe what just happened. Pointing his sword, the young man threatens the leader, who becomes completely terrified. The man screams desperately, begging the warrior not to end his life there. However, the injured friend gets up and blocks the protagonist's blow at that moment. The two former partners face each other with their swords crossed in a tense standoff. They then move apart with a quick leap, creating distance between them. The ex-champion places himself in front of the chief and tells his friend to stop the attack. With his injured hand, the protagonist just watches the scene in complete silence. Facing his comrade, he decides to forgive the guards because of his intervention. The young man then tells the group of soldiers to leave, and they flee, running in fear. The warrior asks why his friend didn't fight back, even though he was stronger than the chief. Furious, the ex-champion says he won't explain himself to someone who is about to be taken out. The former gladiator throws what's left of his weapon towards the swordsman. Holding the weapon, the warrior says he can keep it because it only brings bad luck, and so the young man is left alone in the middle of the square, holding the two swords. Far away, the leader of the guards throws Dak into the water and calls him a complete idiot. The young man's head is forcefully submerged in the cold water of the large tank. Pulling his hair, the chief pulls him out of the water as the young man apologizes. Pushing the warrior's friend, the veteran shouts for him to get out of his sight. One of the henchmen asks if the chief is really going to let the newcomer get away like that. Smiling, the leader orders them to spread the word that the young man has declared war on the elite servants. With a tear running down his cheek, the former champion deeply regrets the whole situation. From a distance, the swordsman watches everything and wonders why his friend didn't react. The water churns as the warrior continues to think about all the confusion. In the dining hall, a lavish table of food is prepared for the most important servants. All the elite servants say a prayer before starting the grand feast, but suddenly, they notice a small movement on the other side of the large courtyard. Then, two maids start whispering about the low-ranking servant's meal. Meanwhile, the poorer workers also give thanks for the food they receive. Their meal is just a simple broth, unlike the veterans' banquet. A man serves the broth to the long line of hungry workers, waiting eagerly. Suddenly, someone's boot stomps firmly on the ground, getting everyone's attention. The protagonist then arrives, and all the workers stare at him in surprise. Confused, the young man wonders why he's getting so many curious looks. With that, the young man just ignores them and grabs a bowl to get his portion of food. But the cook throws the broth in the newcomer's face with an angry expression. The swordsman stands, still as the other servants stare at him with contempt. Wiping his face, the boy notices some workers laughing and mocking the situation. They seem ready to attack the rookie the moment he reacts. Ignoring the provocation, the hero walks toward the elite servants' table. The veterans are shocked and furious at the young man's boldness in approaching them. At that moment, the head butler and other members glare at him with deep hatred. The warrior stops at the head of the food-filled table and looks at everyone calmly. Then, with complete composure, the young man picks up a piece of bread from the banquet right in front of them. He starts eating calmly, challenging the authority of all the veterans. Furious, one of the men shouts, asking what that recruit thinks he's doing. The head butler clenches his teeth, immensely angry at the boy's defiance. He seems to be thinking about how he will punish the young man for this major breach of rules. After the commotion, The protagonist and the leader of the servants go to a private place. The two go to a balcony overlooking the gardens of the grand castle to talk. The veteran then lets out a laugh and says the young man didn't have to do that. But the warrior states that he is strong enough to get a decent meal. The butler looks at him and says he has seen many talented rookies like him before. However, he warns that in exchange for this boldness, the boy will have a new mission. He explains that the former lord was betrayed and imprisoned by greedy nobles. Thus, the young man's new mission is to participate in a hunt with a secret signal. Moments later, the warrior walks alone through a dense and dangerous forest. He finishes eating the bread he took and prepares for the new task. With a confident smile, the young man seems to be looking forward to what's coming. Suddenly, a creature with enormous horns emerges from between the trees. The animal is a red-eyed black stag, a very rare and powerful beast. But before it could react, a shower of arrows flies toward the creature. The stag is hit squarely and falls to the ground, wounded by the accurate attacks. From a branch above, the protagonist smiles, satisfied with his perfect aim. He then approaches his prey, which is down and too weak to fight. Kneeling beside the animal, the young man prepares to deliver the final blow with his dagger. At that moment, the warrior's eye glows with an intense and mysterious blue light. With his hand, he pulls a glowing mana core from inside the stag's body. The young man observes the magical item he obtained with a very focused expression. Holding the core, a blue system screen suddenly appears in front of him. The scene flashes back to the conversation, where the butler asks the young man to complete the mission. And with a confident smile, the hero assures him that everything would turn out fine in the end. But back in the present, someone surprisingly appears behind the protagonist. A knight in armor points at him and accuses him of stealing his prey. The swordsman turns to face the knight, who looks at him with great anger. The warrior questions the accusations, while the other young man glares at him furiously. In the blink of an eye, the protagonist grabs a huge sword that was on the ground. The knight is completely shocked by the appearance of that giant weapon. With a single strike, the hero ends the deer's suffering in front of him. He then holds the sword with a victorious and confident smile. The knight shouts in anger, saying the sparks of logic are about to fly. Unfazed, he draws his own weapon, ready for the fight that is about to begin. The young man in armor also drives his sword into the animal to mark his hunt, and so he shows his golden dagger as proof that the prey was his. The protagonist smiles, showing his dagger, and the knight stares at him in complete shock. He then puts the magic core in a vial and laments the other young man's bad luck. The young man in armor stares back at him with a serious and very determined expression. Next, the warrior begins to cut the deer meat into several large pieces. The knight says that he needs to prove himself on this mission to become an official member, but suddenly, his eyes widen in complete surprise at a new scene. The swordsman is cooking the meat over a campfire and invites him to eat with him. The young man in armor asks what he's doing, and the answer is quite obvious. Very annoyed, the knight doesn't understand the calm attitude of his new rival. Ignoring the other's anger, the hero takes a big bite of the roasted meat. He then offers a piece to his colleague, who stares at him very confused. The knight refuses the offer, but the protagonist insists in a very annoying way. With a mischievous smile on his face, the warrior seems to be having a lot of fun. The meat is then rubbed in the young man's face, who makes a disgusted expression. Completely out of patience, the young man in armor starts fuming through his nose. The swordsman lets out a malicious laugh, seeing his colleague's funny reaction. Tired of the persistence, the knight finally takes the piece of meat from his hand. Kneeling on the ground, the young man takes a bite of the food, while the other watches him. At that moment, the hero's expression turns serious, changing the mood of the place. The knight continues eating in silence, thinking about the whole situation. Holding the food, the young man in armor seems to be reflecting on something important. He remembers that he fought hard to give his younger sister a better life. With that, the young man shouts furiously, asking why the other is helping him. The knight doesn't understand why a rival would bother to help him there. The protagonist stares back at him, his blue eyes glowing intensely. With a slight smile, the warrior says, He doesn't like to see children go hungry. The young man in armor is shocked and asks how he knows about his sister. The swordsman replies that information is his greatest weapon anywhere. Breaking into a cold sweat, the knight can't understand how he got so much secret data. Suddenly, the hero floats in the air and asks if his colleague also knows how to use magic. Suddenly, frightened birds fly away, catching the attention of the two young men. The knight asks what's happening, while the other remains silent. The hero remembers when he was injured by a blue flame wolf in the past. Far away, a group of soldiers fights desperately against a pack of beasts. Their leader seems concerned about the unexpected strength of those magical creatures. Two of his men are attacked by the beasts, which move with great speed. The captain himself is pushed back hard and defends himself with his shield as best he can. Another soldier uses his sword and shield to defend against a wolf's attack. The leader looks back as one of his men appears to be in trouble. With that, the veteran finds himself surrounded by 3 blue flame wolves at the same time. He faces the beasts with determination, preparing for the inevitable combat. The captain tries to fight, but the pack attacks him from all sides without stopping. At that moment, a boot stomps firmly on the ground, and unexpected help arrives. The protagonist and the knight appear with bows in hand, ready for battle. With his eyes glowing, the warrior prepares to show off his skills. One of the fire wolves lunges toward the soldiers with its sharp claws. The swordsman then notches 3 arrows at once on his wooden bow. Running at high speed, the hero leaps to get a better angle of attack. The soldier's leader is shocked to see the sudden arrival of the 2 young men. Focused, the archer aims precisely at each of his moving targets, and with a single shot, he hits all 3 beasts with a shower of arrows. The young man lands nimbly on the ground after his impressive aerial attack. His eyes remain focused, checking if any threats were still nearby. But the last wolf of the pack leaps toward the hero with great fury. Looking up, the warrior faces the beast without showing a shred of fear. With a swift movement, the young man lands a powerful kick on the creature's chest. The other soldiers watch the scene, impressed by the rookie's strength. The wolf is thrown backward by the impact, feeling the full force of the blow. The hero takes a stance with his bow, ready to finish off the beast on the ground. He then looks back and notices that the other wolves are regrouping. The archer fires 3 more arrows at once, hitting the remaining wolves. The soldier's leader is impressed with the young recruit's skill, but suddenly, a blast of blue energy throws him backward with force. At that moment, the last wolf of the pack glares at him with a look full of fury. The beast seems to be stronger and more resilient than all the others in the pack. With agility, the warrior dodges the energy attacks surrounding him. Leaping over the creature, he manages to land more arrows in it. Landing stylishly on the ground, the young man prepares for the next attack, and with a spinning kick, he mercilessly strikes the beast's head. The wolf is thrown to the ground by the impact as the young man lands nearby. Holding an arrow as if it were a dagger, he faces his target. Without hesitation, the young man finishes the creature with a precise blow to the head. Watching from a distance, the knight remains ready to help if needed. The hero then smiles and gives a thumbs up to his new partner. Breaking into a cold sweat, the young man in armor is speechless at the scene he just witnessed. With that, the leader of the soldiers approaches the 2 to thank them for their help. The knight then introduces himself and says the name of his new companion. The captain is surprised to learn that a servant and a recruit saved him. The other soldiers also approach to see the heroes who helped them. The young man in armor feels a bit shy with all the sudden attention. The warrior shows the wolf's magic core and says its level is medium, and with that, he can finally create the medicine he needs with the item. His focused gaze shows that he is determined to complete his mission. Suddenly, one of the soldiers approaches the young man with his giant sword. The captain glares at him and asks why he took so long to get there. Then, the protagonist uses the core to heal the soldier's injured arm. The man is shocked to see his wound disappear in an instant. All the other soldiers are also surprised by the boy's power. The hero introduces himself and asks a favor of the soldier he just healed. The scene flashes back to the past, showing the former lord and a young knight. In the past, the young knight looked at the Lord's painting with his elite guards. Back in the present, the protagonist faces the soldiers with a serious expression. The healed soldier then stops his comrades from attacking the newcomer. The young man in armor is completely confused by the other guards' reaction. One of the female soldiers shouts furiously, wanting to teach the servant a lesson for his audacity. The hero's colleague asks what's going on, not understanding the commotion. The captain then reveals that the young man is the rookie who dared to challenge the madam. He says the warrior is just a servant and should know his place, but the leader warns that if he wants to be a hero, he can face what's coming. The protagonist just listens to everything in silence, maintaining his calm posture. With that, the captain and his troop turn and begin to move away from the area. Suddenly, a strong tremor in the ground gets everyone's attention in the forest. The soldiers are thrown aside by a mysterious and very powerful force. Heavy footsteps echo through the woods, heralding the arrival of a new danger. Then, a new pack of blue flame wolves emerges from between the trees. The soldiers are terrified to see that the enemies have returned with reinforcements. A giant beast known as the Blue King appears, leading the pack's attack. The monster glares at the humans with a look full of hatred and a thirst for revenge. Its red eyes glow as it prepares for the great onslaught. The soldiers then form a defensive barrier, ready for the final combat. Two of them cross their swords with tense and worried expressions. Without wasting time, the giant creature charges full speed toward its targets. The captain clenches his teeth, feeling the pressure of the monster's attack. Even so, he stands firm on the front line to protect his men. But the protagonist appears in front of the leader to face the beast alone. With a confident smile, the young man seems excited for the great challenge. The wolf roars furiously at the audacity of that mere human in its path. The warrior then readies his sword for the imminent impact against the beast. He crouches down and faces the giant creature, without showing any sign of backing down. The Blue King opens its huge mouth, ready to finish the hero off once and for all. The hero wields two swords, preparing for the great battle to come. With that, he faces the Blue King and its pack without showing any fear. The warrior then crosses his blades to defend against the giant beast's attack. With the impact, he is thrown back with great force by the monster's energy. Breaking into a cold sweat, the young man realizes the creature's power is absurd, and with the force of the blow, one of his swords breaks on the spot. Landing on the ground, one of the female soldiers asks if he's okay after the attack. The giant wolf looks down on him with an air of complete superiority. Thus, the soldiers regroup to face the pack once and for all. One of the captain's men shouts in anger, wanting to end this quickly. The leader explains that the smaller wolves are just puppets of the Blue King. The giant creature then confirms this by controlling the entire pack with its power. The captain clenches his teeth, understanding the difficulty of the mission. The young knight is visibly worried about the dangerous situation, but the protagonist's eye glows, and he says he has a plan to win. His armored colleague looks at him, breaking into a cold sweat but trusting his words. The other soldiers look at him, and one of them says he doesn't have to do this. The hero then tells them to only take care of the smaller wolves in the pack. With a focused look, the young man guarantees he will take care of the boss alone. The giant creature lets out a powerful roar that echoes throughout the forest. With its command, the entire pack charges toward the soldiers. The captain shouts for everyone to prepare for the swarm's attack. The troop advances, and the great combat against the wolf pack finally begins. At that, the warrior's eye glows with a blue light much more intense than before. One of the soldiers shouts in fear at the energy coming from the young man's body. He doesn't understand how a simple servant can have such great power. The protagonist smiles and clenches his fist, explaining his plan to his friend. He seems very confident that everything will work out in the end. The young man in armor then remembers a girl named Erica. Seeing the scene, the captain shouts for his men not to let their guard down. Amidst the chaos of battle, the soldiers fight together with great synchrony. The hero then shouts, telling them not to worry about the big boss. The pack of smaller wolves continues to advance in a group against the soldiers, but the Blue King doesn't seem to care about its subordinates' fight. It then throws 2 of its wolves at the captain as decoys. The warrior observes the scene, his blue eye glowing intensely. The leader uses his sacred shield to defend against the 2 beasts' attack. At that moment, the protagonist shouts, telling the other soldier to use his skill. The man then uses his thunder cut from the heavens ability with all his might. The technique creates an explosion of energy that hits the pack squarely. The female soldier also prepares and uses her swift phantom sword ability. Her attack creates several slashes of light that hit the surrounding creatures. The 3 soldiers use their best abilities to finish off the pack. Breaking into a cold sweat, the captain realizes the young servant's plan is working. With that, the protagonist and the knight prepare for the next phase. The female soldier approaches the 2 to help in the fight against the other wolves. The young man in armor faces the beasts with determination and charges forward without fear. He leaps and attacks the wolves with his sword, cutting down all in his path. The warrior praises his colleague's courage for finally showing his worth. The young man's eye glows, and he says the 2 of them are not just servants there. Breaking into a cold sweat, the knight asks what his companion's real plan is. Suddenly, the protagonist appears in front of the Blue King for the final confrontation. The knight in armor watches the scene from a distance, a bit worried. The hero then summons his magic book and prepares a powerful spell. With a purple magic circle, the young man prepares to attack the giant beast. He launches a shower of ice crystals at the wolf with full force. The young man in armor is completely shocked to see his friend's power. Even wounded, the giant creature still glares at the warrior with great hatred. With a confident smile, the hero says he still has one more surprise. The beast roars furiously and prepares for a final, desperate attack. Taking a big leap, the protagonist sets the stage for the knight to act. With his sword in hand, the young man in armor charges full force at the giant beast. With that, he lands a direct hit on the glowing monster's head. At that moment, the hero concentrates a large amount of energy in his hand. An azure aura then creates a huge warrior holding a colossal sword. Without wasting time, the magic blade pierces the creature's body from bottom to top. The wolf's red eye widens, feeling the overwhelming power of the attack. And soon, a beam of purple light explodes, coming straight out of the enemy's mouth. The force of the energy pillar is so great that it defeats the pack leader on the spot. The Blue King begins to turn into magic dust while the smaller wolves flee. His armored partner breathes a sigh of relief, watching the monster disappear before him, but he is soon completely shocked by the ease of that victory. Calmly, the swordsman holds a glowing fragment left from the clash. He then walks calmly, stepping on the ice remnants on the forest floor. Nearby, the purple-haired female soldier picks up one of the crystals, very impressed. With the fight over, the troop leader approaches the 2 rookies. The veteran gives a smile, saying the plan worked thanks to their help. Then, one of the guards starts laughing loudly, teasing the boy in armor. The recruit listens to his colleague's jokes about his lack of experience. Surprised, the mysterious woman just watches everything from a distance, still holding the item. The young man in armor gets annoyed with the pushy guard's attitude. Then, he points his finger in the purple-haired woman's face, demanding an explanation. The recruit fumes furiously, but the warrior crosses her arms and turns her face away. However, she suddenly widens her eyes, looking completely terrified. The 2 soldiers notice her strange reaction and don't understand what happened. With that, the rookie turns around and goes pale with fear at what he just saw. The female soldier charges forward furiously, shouting something right in the young man's face. Impatiently, she shoves his chest, wanting him to pay attention. At that moment, his colleagues hold the frightened boy, trying to calm the situation. He seems to remember a fun moment of being playfully crushed by his partners, but reality soon returns when the group comes face to face with a horse's legs. Then, a very elegant man with reddish hair appears, mounted on the animal. The captain's expression turns serious as the warrior forces the rookie's head down. The black-haired hero just watches his colleague being held that way. With a focused gaze, the young warrior realizes the situation has become very tense. Immediately, all the guards kneel on the ground, showing complete respect. The noble knight glares at the troop with a visibly annoyed expression. The squad leader remains bowed, awaiting the newcomer's orders. From atop his mount, the elegant man seems to demand an explanation from the veteran. However, the noble's gaze shifts when he spots the protagonist messing with the fallen beast. With a smile on his face, the hero pulls a dagger from the defeated beast's body. The captain then tries to explain the situation to the noble, who seems suspicious. The scene shows a memory of the protagonist wielding a sword with confidence. And in this flashback, he seems to be challenging the noble and his powerful mother. Back in the present, the elegant man gets irritated by that memory. Kneeling on the ground, the young knight continues to sweat nervously, very worried. From atop his horse, the noble addresses the young man in armor, calling him by name. He continues to taunt the recruit, who remains with his head down, listening. The young man is speechless at the harsh words of the cruel noble, and with a wicked smile, the red-haired knight shows his authority. At that moment, the young man in armor looks back and sees his colleague walking away. The protagonist turns and faces the noble with a smile full of confidence. The purple-haired female soldier smiles maliciously, ready for what's to come. The elegant man gets angry at the servant's audacity and yells at him furiously. But the hero interrupts him and says no one there kneels out of admiration. He reveals that they all do it only because of his mother, who is a countess. With a mocking smile, the warrior continues to provoke the noble without fear. The young man gestures with his hands, showing he doesn't care about authority. With a wink, he shows he's not afraid of any consequences. The hero finishes his speech with an expression of pure amusement on his face. The noble grinds his teeth with great force, showing all his restrained anger. With that, he shouts furiously at the servant for his insolence and audacity. Suddenly, chains shoot out from the ground and lunge toward the black-clad warrior. The young man's blue eyes glow as he faces the threat without moving. The magic chains quickly wrap around his arms, holding him in place. Then, 3 hooded figures appear and completely immobilize him. One of the mysterious guards places a sharp blade against the protagonist's neck. The other soldiers are shocked to recognize the blades of the Empire. The purple-haired warrior watches the scene with a serious and worried expression. The scene shows the noble's mother, a powerful countess with her own guards. One of the red-eyed assassins glares at the soldiers with a cold look. The noble then turns to the kneeling captain and reaffirms his authority. He continues with his annoyed expression, feeling very superior there. Sweating nervously, the veteran can do nothing to stop the situation. Even in chains, the hero maintains a confident smile on his face. From a distance, the young man in armor watches his friend being captured, confused. The captain and the female soldier look at scene with expressions of pure concern. The purple-haired girl seems visibly tense about the new developments. The squad leader clenches his teeth, seeming to feel completely powerless. The noble turns his back on them with an air of contempt, as if they don't matter. The 2 young men then face each other in a tense, staring contest. The protagonist smiles mockingly, showing he has no fear at all. But the noble returns the smile with a wicked look full of bad intentions. With that, he draws a sword and offers it to the kneeling young man in armor. The young knight's eyes widen in shock at the unexpected proposal. The red-haired man continues with his malicious smile, holding the weapon. He then throws the sword to the ground and tells the recruit to pick it up immediately. With a superior look, the noble seems to be enjoying himself greatly. The young man in armor is speechless and asks what he means by that. He looks at his captured friend and understands that he's being forced to fight him. The scene changes to a memory of an orc camp with a fallen man. Then, a powerful orc lands a strong punch on the fallen warrior's chest. The young man falls to the ground, feeling the impact, as 2 orcs look down on him. Even injured, he leans on his sword with a look full of determination. In the distance, the orc king watches everything from his throne with a sword in front of him. He glares at the human prisoners and considers simply letting them go. The memory shows the young man in armor being held by one of the monsters. With a bruised face, the recruit shouts desperately, trying to break free. The orc leader gives a wicked smile, enjoying the scene of despair. In front of them, The protagonist wields his sword, ready for the rescue. He takes a step forward, planting the tip of the blade firmly on the ground. The young knight looks at him with a serious and confident expression. With that, he remembers the warm hug of his beloved younger sister. His face shows an expression of pain and sadness as he thinks of the girl. The knight then closes his eyes, seeming to have accepted his cruel fate. A tear rolls down from his eye, showing all his suffering and fear. The hero also seems shaken by that painful memory from the past. Crying, he asks his friend to tell his sister that he was a great knight. The memory scene shows the standoff between the two warriors and the monster. Back in the present, the young man in armor faces his chained friend. The protagonist remains bound by the chains and the Empire's guards. Trembling, the young man in armor holds the sword the noble threw on the ground. The red-haired man looks at him and seems to wonder what happened. He then asks why the rookie is hesitating to attack his companion. The young warrior grips the sword firmly, seeming to have made a decision. With a slight smile, the noble seems curious to see what he will do. He continues to provoke him, saying he abandoned his sister for a stranger. The young man is shocked by the noble's audacity in mentioning his family. The elegant man asks how he thinks the girl got the sword. He then reveals that the young woman saved money from her meals to buy the weapon. The young knight is horrified by the revelation about his sister and the sword. With a smile, the noble says that if he won't fight, then he has no more use. In shock, the young man in armor loses his strength and begins to fall to his knees. He stays on the ground, completely devastated, unable to believe what he heard. The red-haired man then turns and begins to walk away from the place. Looking back, he gives a wicked smile, enjoying the situation, but the captured protagonist asks his colleague to just finish him off. Even among the guards, the warrior continues to smile defiantly. The noble glares at him with a superior look, waiting for the next move. With a confident smile, the hero seems to have a plan in mind for everyone. The young man in armor is completely confused, not understanding his friend's attitude. The warrior then addresses the noble knight with a mocking tone. The red-haired man glares at him with an expression of pure disdain. Then, one of the Empire's guards places the blade on the prisoner's neck. The noble just watches the scene with his usual malicious smile. Suddenly, he claps his hands and orders his men to release the bold servant. The chains fall to the ground, and the hooded guards slowly back away. Now free, the two warriors face each other, ready for the inevitable duel. With a powerful blow, the young man blocks a giant sword that appears out of nowhere. He looks up, shocked by the power of that completely unexpected attack. His eyes glow with fury as he sees his sister being used as bait by the noble. Taking advantage of the distraction, the protagonist leaps with full force toward his colleague. The knight blocks the warrior's kick with his armor-protected arm. With the impact, he is thrown backward by a wave of glowing blue energy. The two leap, and their swords clash in the air in a spectacular combat. The young man in armor struggles his hardest to defend against the rapid attacks. The hero then attacks from above with his sword, aiming for a precise strike on his rival. The blades cross again, creating sparks from the force of the impact. But the protagonist stops his blow at the other's neck, who asks why. With his blue eye glowing, the warrior shows that he didn't want to hurt him. With his eyes glowing with anger, the young knight grinds his teeth furiously. He then attacks with all his might, but the hero blocks the blow with his bare hand. With that, the two back away and face each other from a distance, ready for the next move. The protagonist holds up 3 fingers and proposes a quick challenge to his colleague. With a confident smile, he invites him to end the fight in 3 strikes. The young man in armor glares at him, his red eye glowing intensely. He then accepts the proposal and says he will finish it in 3 seconds. His pinkish eyes show that he is completely focused on the combat. From a distance, the noble watches the scene, interested in the outcome of the fight. Without wasting time, the hero dashes at high speed toward his opponent. The knight does the same, and the two run toward each other for the clash. They leap, and their swords cross in the air in another impressive attack. But the warrior takes the chance to whisper his plan to his friend. With their blades locked, they stare at each other, waiting for an opening to attack. The young man in armor remembers a piece of advice to never abandon his friends. Sweating nervously, he finally understands his companion's true intention. With a swift move, the two separate and switch positions in the same instant. The Empire's guards are confused by the sudden change in attitude. Suddenly, the two warriors team up and stand back to back. With a combined attack, they create a tornado of energy that hits everyone. The force of the blow throws the other soldiers far away, catching them by surprise. The noble tries to hold on to his horse, which is spooked by the explosion of power. Sweating nervously, he doesn't understand what's happening or how they allied. The protagonist then floats in the air, preparing for the final attack against him. Shouting with all his might, he concentrates a large amount of energy. The red-haired man stares at him, frightened by the servant's immense power. Then, the hero charges forward, surrounded by an aura of powerful purple lightning. The noble tries to block the sword, but the energy hits him relentlessly. With a smile, the young man tells his enemy to never underestimate him again. With that, the elegant man is thrown far away by the force of the electric attack. With the impact of the attack, the protagonist lands on the ground, pushing away the hooded assassins. But suddenly, the warrior's eyes widen, seeming to notice something dangerous approaching. Then, the red-haired noble shouts furiously, ordering everyone to stay back immediately. The mysterious guards quickly retreat with their chains in hand, looking very scared. Mounted on his horse, the elegant man unleashes an aura of purple lightning, focusing on his target. The hero watches the scene with a serious look, realizing the situation has become complicated. Shouting with all his might, the noble knight concentrates an absurd amount of energy. At that moment, a huge magic circle appears in the sky, glowing with powerful lightning. Sweating nervously, the blonde captain is completely shocked to recognize the strong spell. The young man in black stands firm and activates his own magic, creating a protective aura. With a slight smile, the warrior notes that fighting all this will be a lot of work. Then, a system screen appears, showing that the attack's magic level is high. The panel warns that the young man's body wouldn't be able to withstand such a strong impact, but he smiles confidently, gathering crystals in his hands, and saying he'll find out the limits soon. On the other side, the noble points his finger and promises to show the great difference in power. With that, a giant column of destructive lightning falls from the sky directly toward the boy. However, the electric attack clashes head-on with a huge ice barrier rising from the ground. The protagonist uses his freezing powers to defend himself and faces his rival without fear. The collision of the two abilities creates a colossal explosion, kicking up dust everywhere. Shielding his face, the elegant man is terrified to see that a servant used sorcery. The mounted noble shoots a giant energy beam, and the protagonist defends by creating a wall of ice. With the explosion, the elegant man backs away on his horse, watching pieces of ice fly everywhere. His face turns grim, completely confused, wondering how there's ice in a place like this. Then, from atop his mount, the enemy taunts him, asking if that's all the boy can do. The warrior remains standing, glaring at his rival with anger as he's called a huge failure. Watching from afar, the other soldiers are shocked, unable to believe the young man is still alive. And the blonde captain sweats nervously, very tense, paying attention to every detail of the terrifying combat. But the red-haired knight gives a malicious smile, thinking his rival is using some dirty trick. With that, he pulls the reins, unleashing more purple lightning, and shouts that a slave would never use magic. Quickly, the protagonist activates another blue magic circle on the ground, preparing for the next blow. However, the boy's eyes widen when the system warns that his energy is depleted and he has no more mana. At that moment, the hero loses his strength and nearly falls, having to lean on his sword. Sweating heavily, he realizes the situation has taken a turn for the worse as the enemy lightning strikes nearby. A huge storm of lightning hits the area, forcing the young man to his knees in great pain. The warrior in black clenches his teeth, trying to resist the powerful shock of the devastating magic. On the other side, the noble's eyes glow intensely as he shouts for the servant to just be done with it. With that, a gigantic explosion of purple energy destroys everything around, engulfing the young man's body, and the protagonist lets out a cry of agony, feeling the full impact of the overwhelming electric attack. Then, the boy's blue eye glows in the dark, and he wonders if this will be his final end. But a bright aura covers the warrior as he laments losing the chance to redo his life. The protagonist's magic book appears with a warning that using magic without mana causes a loss of control. At that, the boy is covered in blue flames and shouts furiously, warning that he won't go down like this. With that, the hero's entire body gains a very powerful dark aura, showing his new form. And the system shows that all of the young man's levels and abilities are now completely unknown. Seeing the boy's marked face, the enemy is terrified, wondering what that bizarre thing is. But the warrior himself doesn't understand what's happening as he holds his face in pain. The hero realizes this form is very unstable and feels the power won't last long. So he wields his sword, covered in dark lightning, wanting to end the fight as quickly as possible. The red-haired man breaks into a cold sweat, completely shocked to see his rival's absurd magic. Taking a huge leap, the young man attacks while the knight thinks he's never seen a spell like it. Without wasting time, the boy in black charges forward, cutting through the air, heading straight for the nobleman. But the enemy dodges, and the warrior's blade hits the ground, creating an explosion of energy on the spot. With the impact of the blow, several giant ice spikes emerge from the ground, chasing the elegant man. The knight quickly uses his own purple lightning on his arm to defend against the ice attack. Mounted on his horse, the enemy gathers energy and launches his lightning at the boy once more. However, the warrior dodges the blow with great ease, showing his speed has increased immensely. With a dark, glowing gaze, the young man faces his rival, ready to continue his counter-attack. The noble breaks into a cold sweat and clutches his clothes, realizing the situation is getting out of his control. Then, the hero flies past and lands a very fast cut, injuring the knight's shoulder on the horse. Standing on the ground, the boy takes a deep breath, showing great exhaustion from the unstable magic. Seeing this, the injured enemy glares at the young man from a distance and notices his opponent's exhausted state. The protagonist remains breathless and sweating, trying to stay on his feet even without any energy. With a malicious smile, the noble gathers a lot of magic, thinking the warrior has already reached his limit. Then he fires a huge blast of lightning, wanting to finish the battle once and for all. But the hero doesn't back down, and his blue fire aura burns stronger, preparing for the great impact. The young man swings his sword, creating an arc of energy that cuts the enemy's lightning in half. Breaking through the attack, the boy charges forward, warning that this is the end. As the noble panics, the two warriors collide in the air in a violent clash of swords and bright lightning everywhere. They glare at each other up close, fighting with great anger to see who will win this test of strength. However, a golden defensive magic circle appears out of nowhere, blocking the protagonist's final blow. The warrior is thrown back by a barrier of light that appeared out of nowhere. Then, an older man appears and uses his magic to stop the fight between the two. He says that this is a hunting ground, not a gladiator arena. Mounted on his horse, the veteran gives a harsh scolding to everyone present. The red-haired knight is in shock and calls the newcomer father. The hero also recognizes the powerful man as the great Marquis Darius. With no strength left, the young man falls to his knees, and his dark aura fades. The Marquis looks at the boy with a serious expression, seeming to notice something different. With his body exhausted, the protagonist finally faints and passes out on the ground. A few days pass, and the scene changes to the ceiling of a very elegant room. The young man wakes up a bit lost, wondering where he has ended up now. He remembers his dark transformation and is very frightened by it. With that, the warrior sits up quickly in bed and starts checking his own body. Looking at his hand, he sighs in relief to be back to normal finally. Suddenly, his armored colleague says that he has finally woken up, but the silver-haired young man suddenly grabs him with a scary face. With a bizarre look, the friend gives the warrior a very strange "good morning." He then explains that the protagonist passed out after that intense fight. At that, the captain carried him while the others took care of him, very worried. The hero gets a sweat drop on his head, thinking his friends exaggerated a bit. Recovered, the young man gets up and puts on his boots, ready to leave the room. With a smile, he says he's fine and is going to thank the other soldiers. The warrior smiles and remembers he needs to thank his armored friend as well. With a wink, he thanks his colleague for all the help he gave him there. The other young man is surprised, as he didn't know he was capable of saying thank you. With everything settled, the two walk calmly through the streets of the city, but a group of men on the street stops and stares at the pair with a strange expression. They surround the two, and the hero asks what those guys want. Nearby, two maids gossip about a rumor involving the young man and the noble's son. One of the girls grabs the warrior, asking about the story between him and the noble. The maids let out a scream of terror and run away desperately. His armored colleague is confused and says they look like they've seen a ghost. With that, the protagonist repeats the word, ghost, deep in thought. The friend then jokes that it's because of his pale face, and the hero gets annoyed. Suddenly, a group of men approaches, interrupting their argument. Then, a bald man with an eye patch stops in front of the pair and glares at them. The brute starts mocking the protagonist, calling him Great Lord. He yells at the people on the street, telling everyone to stay out of the mess. With a serious look, the bald man glares at the hero with an expression of hatred. The enemy warns that he came to settle the score from their last fight. The black-haired young man listens to the threats in silence, showing no reaction. The man says that last time he was caught off guard, and that's why he lost. Pointing his finger, he promises the situation will be very different now. With a furious look, the brute guarantees he won't make the same mistake. He repeats that he was careless, and that's why the protagonist managed to trick him. Then, the bald man snaps his fingers, calling his squad of guards to the fight. The hero remains still, observing everything with a calm and carefree look. The group's leader turns to his men, not understanding the delay in attacking. He yells at the troop for not obeying his snap attack signal. But the guards tremble with fear, because they know that young man is a powerful monster. Seeing the scene, his armored colleague gives an awkward smile at the situation. The man with the eye patch calls his guards cowards and says he won't back down. He then looks to the side and focuses on the armored friend of his real target. With a wicked smile, he thinks he can take out his anger on the other young man. The bald man grabs the young knight and accuses him of betraying their former lord. Confused, the recruit hears that the other will take the place of his former master. The enemy raises his fist and shouts that he will punish the boy for his betrayal. However, the silver-haired young man catches the punch with his hand without difficulty. The man with the eye patch is shocked by the knight's unexpected strength. With his eye glowing, the young man says he has no right to judge him. With a swift movement, the armored knight twists the brute's arm. The guards ask if their boss is okay, but he just glares at the young man with anger. Suddenly, the captain of the elite troop appears, shouting about all the commotion. He and his team advance, and the bald man recognizes the elite knights. The brute thinks the pair of servants is done for at the hands of the troop. The captain approaches, and the man kneels, saying he will give a report. He points to the two and lies, saying he was teaching them good manners. With a smile, the protagonist waves to the elite knights without a worry. The bald man is shocked and shouts that the young servant is an insolent fool, but the other elite knights approach and greet the young man cheerfully. The man with the eye patch is completely confused, not understanding what's happening. The two elite soldiers are happy to see that the hero woke up well. The boy's enemy turns pale with fear and thinks he's having a nightmare. Then, he is accused of violating the rules for fighting with other knights there. The purple-haired warrior says they don't care about that old woman's rules. With a wicked look, she warns him to keep quiet, or he'll lose his other eye. The troop then ignores the man and asks the protagonist to come with them. With a victorious smile, the young man tells the bald man that it looks like he won again. Later, everyone is in a tavern, toasting and celebrating together. The protagonist says he was going to thank them for saving him, but he ended up saving them. The female soldier says it was perfect, because she never liked that man anyway. The young man in armor asks if she also had a problem with the bald man. Very angrily, the woman tells him not to ruin her drink with questions. Then, the troop's captain clears his throat to get everyone's attention. He says he has a serious matter to discuss with the pair of rookies. The duo is shocked when the veteran invites both of them to join the elite troop. The leader explains that if they accept, they will receive the same treatment as high-level servants. But the protagonist refuses the offer, saying he has no interest in becoming a knight. With a confident smile, he reveals that he has much greater ambitions than that. The elite knights are left speechless and blushing at the young man's declaration. One of the knights tells the young man to give up on becoming the Lord of Rhine. The female soldier shouts that what he used was magic, not some mysterious swordsmanship. With a focused gaze, she asserts that the hero used magic to defeat the Blue King. The other knight wonders how a former slave could learn sorcery. Then, the elite captain turns to the protagonist and asks for an explanation. The young man realizes he's been found out, but remains calm in front of everyone. He thinks it's a good thing. He already prepared an excuse in advance. His armored colleague turns to his friend, curious about what he will say. With a cunning look, the warrior says the truth is that the young man is not a servant. The protagonist breaks into a cold sweat and wonders what his colleague's next move will be. Pointing her finger, the woman reveals that the young man is actually a former noble. She continues with her theory, and everyone at the table looks at the boy in black. The female soldier grabs the protagonist's arm and says she can feel the truth. She says he is the illegitimate son of a noble who was persecuted and enslaved, and that his true goal is to gain power, to take back everything he lost. The young man in armor is shocked and wonders where they got that idea. The hero lets out an awkward laugh while his friend still has a stunned look on his face. With a fake smile, the young man says they caught him and that nobles are the worst. Pretending to cry, he invents a story about a conspiracy against his family. With a clenched fist, he promises to get revenge on the nobles who betrayed him in the past. His armored colleague thinks the captain would never fall for a lie like that, but the elite leader says he will keep the secret if he doesn't cause any trouble. He just asks the young man not to use magic in front of the madam or her son. With a victorious smile, the protagonist agrees and thanks him for his trust. The captain then announces that the Marquis wants to see him now that he's awake. The hero and his friend walk through the castle, while the leader watches them from afar. The other elite knights join their captain in the castle hallway. The veteran repeats the name of the city isle, seeming to think about something important. The pair of friends enters the Marquis's room, and the knight comments on the lie. He then asks why the protagonist chose the story of being a noble from Isle. The hero explains that the city of Isle is a good place to hide. With a smile, he says the noble story is just to throw others off the trail. The knight repeats the phrase, "throw others off," still a bit confused. He then remembers something and asks if his friend knows the three-legged crow. The protagonist turns and questions if that isn't just another misdirection technique. The scene changes and shows a memory of the two in an orc camp. The warrior apologizes to his friend for not being able to save him that time. The young knight closes his eyes, seeming to have accepted his cruel fate. With a swift move, the hero leaps and eliminates the orcs that was holding his colleague. The knight is shocked, and his friend says he can give the message to his sister himself. The young man charges forward with his glowing sword to face the orc king. With a powerful blow, he strikes the monster's chest with all his might. But the orc king laughs, and his dark aura protects him from the attack. The protagonist's sword gets stuck in the monster's body, which glares at him with hatred. The young man in black coughs and feels an intense pain in his body due to the power. The orc king smiles and asks if he really thought he could take him down. Suddenly, the armored knight attacks the monster from behind to help. He reminds the orc that he's also there, ready to fight with all his strength. The monster is furious with the surprise attack from the young silver warrior. The duo then attacks the orc king at the same time in a combined assault. The protagonist is panting and feels his body growing weaker and weaker. The two warriors cut the monster's body into several pieces at once. The hero turns and accuses his friend of calling his words claim. The pair starts arguing about the rescue, while three orcs approach. The knight says the hostage could have been hurt with that recklessness, but the protagonist replies that even if he cut him, the orcs wouldn't have let them go. The argument continues, and the two prepare to fight the other monsters. The other prisoners watch the scene, and an orc starts to move in the background. The pair argues, while the audience watches the scene with bored expressions. The warrior snaps his fingers and tells everyone to look forward now. The young man in armor makes the three-legged crow sign with his hand. He explains that it's a sign he learned when he was a slave in the association. The protagonist remains silent, looking surprised by his friend's revelation. He then gets annoyed and says his friend is already planning to get captured again. Back in the present, the hero says he learned the sign from an acquaintance of his. With a sad smile, he reveals it was his stubborn and foolish best friend. The knight wonders who this acquaintance from his slave days could be. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door and tells the pair of friends to come in. The two introduce themselves to the head of the family, Marquis Darius, who summoned them. With a serious look, the Marquis asks how the protagonist is feeling. The young man replies that he is completely better thanks to his care. The armored knight also introduces himself and offers his greetings. The Marquis says he called them both for a very important reason. He wants to talk about the incident that happened at the hunting ground recently. The silver-haired young man thinks that entering there without permission was a bad idea. The family leader says he has known Captain Glenn and his men for a long time. He remembers surviving life or death situations with his team. Looking at the painting, he says he can't imagine losing any of them. With a gentle smile, he thanks the pair for saving his three men. The armored knight expresses regret for not noticing the anomaly sooner. The Marquis tells the two not to blame themselves, as they did nothing wrong. He takes responsibility for not foreseeing the monsters' attack. He then asks if the captain has already spoken to them about the elite knights. With a serious look, the protagonist politely declines the invitation again. The Marquis turns and asks what the young silver knight's answer is. The young man is shocked and stammers, not knowing what to say to the boss. He wonders if he can join the elite, even though he isn't an official member. With a nervous look, he clenches his teeth and seems to be in a big dilemma. With his fist on his chest, the knight shouts that he wants to become an elite knight. The Marquis then asks if the protagonist has any other requests for him. The protagonist looks at his friend with a smile as he shows off. With a focused look, he says he has a request concerning his friend's sister. The hero asks the Marquis to transfer the girl, Erika, from the Williams family to the Hall family. The armored knight is completely shocked by his colleague's request. The young man in black confirms that the girl is nearby and explains the situation. He says the siblings want to be together since her health is very frail. The family leader asks if this is the protagonist's true wish. The young man then says he can't ignore a comrade and friend when he's in trouble. The young knight is speechless, his eyes welling up with emotion. The protagonist then asks the Marquis to return the sister to his friend. The family leader repeats the young man's words about friendship and camaraderie. He tells the knight to stand back, as the Williams family is involved in this. The protagonist and his friend are left alone in the room with the Marquis. The family leader approaches and begins to walk around the grand castle room. Alone with the protagonist, the Marquis calls his name and seems to want to talk. He remembers the day the young man challenged him to a fight in the arena. At that time, he was convinced the young man was just an ordinary slave, but he was surprised when the young man withstood a magic attack without getting hurt. However, what surprised him most was the power he showed in the fight with Freed. The scene shows an image of the protagonist in his dark and powerful form. The Marquis says that a persecuted noble would have other ways to reclaim his life. The young man in black faces the family leader with a serious and attentive look. With ice crystals floating around him, he shows his powers to the man. He says he is not as great a person as the Marquis seems to think. With a smile, he says he's just an ordinary person who uses a little magic. The protagonist says that to a great mage like him, he must be a trivial existence. With a challenging look, the Marquis asks who the young man in front of him is. He says it's hard to believe that an ordinary person could use magic so well. With his hand on his chest, the protagonist says he is the lord who loves his people. He then unsheathes his sword and prepares for what's to come. He says the Marquis respects ability, not someone's bloodline. With the sword in front of him, the young man says his ideal is to fulfill his master's ideal. Kneeling, he promises that one day he will become a great lord like the Marquis. With a determined look, he shouts that in the end, he will even surpass his master. The young man says his life was saved twice, and that he will prove his worth in the test. He then asks the Marquis to decide how to use the sword that is himself. The family leader gives a smile, impressed by the young man's determination. With a wave of his hand, he says he will see what the young man can do and dismisses him. The protagonist stands up and thanks him for the opportunity with great respect. As the young man is leaving, the Marquis calls him to ask one last question. The family leader asks what the young man thinks of a person named Rowan. The protagonist is confused, as he has never heard that name in his life. The Marquis then drops the question and tells the young man to leave the room for good. The young man leaves, letting the family leader alone with his thoughts. From the window, the man wonders what the young man thought after seeing that scene. Suddenly, a figure appears out of nowhere in the room, and the Marquis calls him Cornell. The man says that if the young man is an ordinary person, he is an incredible genius. From the young man's reaction, he realizes he doesn't know Rowan and is not from Isle. He concludes that the young man has some hidden motive, and that they should remain vigilant. The Marquis says there is already a precedent for this type of situation. He looks at the portrait of a red-haired woman with a sad expression. The man in the suit says he has one more thing to report to his master. He hands over a letter, saying a message has arrived from the spirit cat. With his chin in his hand, the Marquis wonders what information they have gathered. The scene shows a cat walking on a tree branch at night. In his room, the protagonist observes the supplies he received from the Marquis. With a magic stone in his hand, he thinks his skills will increase greatly. Sitting on the bed, he is still curious to know who this Rowan person is. He only heard the name in his past life, but knows nothing about this person. The young man finds it strange the way the Marquis asked, as if it were natural to know. He decides to set it aside and ask his friend for details later. For now, he needs to focus on gaining strength for the next selection. The protagonist sighs and sits near the chest of gold coins. With a determined look, he summons his magic grimoire to begin training. The book opens, and several pages fly around the young man, who is ready. He then drinks one of the magic potions he received to increase his power. After drinking it all, he throws the empty vials on the floor with a disgusted look. With a focused gaze, he prepares to absorb the potion's energy. The young man concentrates all the power in his hands and begins the absorption process. Veins pop out on his face as he feels the energy coursing through his body. With great effort, he manages to absorb all the power of the purple potion. The system announces that his magic power has successfully increased by 1 point. He remembers the grimoire, says that mixing magic items can strengthen him. Without magic resistance, he could lose control if his mana runs out. He drinks another potion and complains about the horrible taste of the purple liquid. With a disgusted look, he thinks he'll be done before sunrise. Looking at his status screen, he wonders if there isn't an easier way. The system then detects a monster core and suggests creating a tool. With the blue king's core in his hand, he thinks about turning it into an item. The idea seems interesting, and he decides to test this new ability. He squeezes the core and concentrates his energy to start creating the item. With his eyes closed, he invokes the grimoire's power to help with the process. A giant magic blacksmith appears behind him to forge the new equipment. Following the book's instructions, he pours his magic into the monster core. He then thinks about what would be a good type of magic tool to create. With a determined look, he finally chooses the form of his new item. The core begins to glow and transform in his hand with the energy. The magic blacksmith raises his hammer and prepares for the final blow. With all his might, he strikes the core and generates the new item for the young man. A bright light shines from the protagonist's bedroom window during the night. A golden aura surrounds the protagonist as he finishes the creation process. The system announces that the magic tool generation was successfully completed. The young man now has a blue bracelet that increases his magic power by 1 point. He is curious about the item's power bonus and grabs another potion to test it. With a smile, he drinks the blue liquid to see if the bracelet's effect works. The system then shows that his magic power increased by 2 points at once. With the bracelet, he can increase his power by 2 points without needing to absorb. The young man then wonders what the bracelet's other effect, called intuition, is. Suddenly, he starts having a strange vision and his eyes glow. With his new ability, he can see through the walls of his room. He sees the silhouettes of 2 tired maids walking down the castle hallway. Back in reality, the 2 young women stretch, unaware they are being watched. The protagonist realizes he can see people's energy with his new power. He sees the energy of the Marquis and his wife talking in a room. The flame he sees on them means they are using magic at that moment. He can also see the silhouettes of the guards patrolling the castle. Suddenly, a mysterious voice says it's hungry, and the young man gets scared. He looks behind him and wonders whose voice he just heard.